What's up, my spooky friends? Tonight, we take you inside one of the scariest real-life stories. Get ready, because we're about to explore the terror of the Enfield Poltergeist. Imagine a house in suburban London that looks ordinary from the outside, but inside, an unseen darkness lurks. This is the story of the Hodgson family who live in a nightmare, living in unavoidable supernatural terror. What you hear tonight is based on true events. Prepare your nerves, because the horror is about to begin. In 1977, in a small house in Enfield, London, lived a family whose lives were about to change forever. The Hodgson family consisted of Peggy Hodgson, a loving single mother, and her 4 children: 11-year-old Janet, 13-year-old Margaret, 10-year-old Johnny, and 7-year-old Billy. They lived a simple but happy life in their 2-story house filled with love and warmth. The Hodgson family's daily life was not much different from other families in their neighborhood. Peggy worked hard to provide for her family, while Janet and Margaret helped out with the household chores. Johnny and Billy, as energetic boys, often played in the backyard or at the local park. Although their life was not easy, they found happiness in the togetherness and love of their family. However, their happiness began to be disturbed by strange, unexplained events. At first, these events seemed trivial and easy to ignore. Doors opening or closing by themselves, knocking sounds at night, and a sudden cold feeling in several rooms of the house. Peggy, who was skeptical of the supernatural, tried to ignore these signs and considered them normal. One night, when everyone was asleep, Janet woke up from her sleep with an uneasy feeling. She felt her bed shaking as if something was moving it. At first, she thought it was just a nightmare, but when the bed shook again, more strongly, she was frightened and screamed for her mother. Peggy, who heard Janet's screams, immediately ran to her children's room. She found Janet sitting on the bed with a pale face, while Margaret was also awake with a look of fear. Peggy tried to calm them down, but her own fear grew when she saw the cupboard in the corner of the room moving by itself. Feeling unable to handle this situation, Peggy decided to call the police. 2 police officers arrived shortly after and began to examine the house. One of the officers, WPC Carolyn Heaps, saw a chair in the living room moving by itself. Although skeptical at first, these observations led her to believe that there was something that could not be explained logically. After the incident, Peggy felt the need to seek further help. She contacted a local priest, who then suggested that they contact the Society for Psychical Research. The priest also gave prayers to protect the family from possible supernatural interference. The Hodgson family began to feel a little hope when Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair from the Society for Psychical Research came to help. They hoped that this investigation would provide answers and solutions to stop the terror they were experiencing. However, they did not realize that this was just the beginning of a series of horrific events that would test their mental and emotional resilience. One night in August 1977, Janet woke up with a strange feeling. The air felt cold, and there was a strange knocking sound on the wall of the room. She thought this was just a hallucination because she was half asleep, but the knocking became louder and more rhythmic. Fear began to creep into her, but she still tried to calm herself down. When she heard a loud noise in the wardrobe moving by itself, she could no longer hold back her screams. Peggy ran to her children's room after hearing Janet's screams. She found Janet standing in the corner of the room with a pale face, while Margaret sat on the bed with her eyes wide open. Janet, crying, told what happened, making Peggy even more worried. She saw the wardrobe that had moved from its place and toys that had fallen on the floor. Feeling scared and confused, Peggy decided to call the police. 2 officers, WPC Carolyn Heaps and her partner, arrived at the Hodgson family home shortly after. They checked every corner of the house, found nothing suspicious. While they were in the living room, a chair in the corner of the room moved by itself. Although skeptical, the officers could not ignore what they saw and advised Peggy to seek further help. After the police left, the strange occurrences became more frequent. The knocking on the walls became louder and more regular. Small objects such as toys and books began to move on their own. Peggy and the children began to feel frightened every night, having difficulty sleeping and being constantly on guard for possible events. In desperation, Peggy contacted a local priest, hoping he could help. The priest came to the house and performed prayers to ward off negative energy. He also recommended that Peggy contact the Society for Psychical Research, an organization that specializes in dealing with supernatural phenomena. The priest left the house concerned, offering prayers to protect the Hodgson family. Shortly after the priest's recommendation, Peggy contacted the Society for Psychical Research. Maurice Gross, an experienced paranormal investigator, along with his partner Guy Leon Playfair, took on the case immediately. Gross, who had recently lost his daughter in a tragic accident, felt an emotional connection to Janet and her family. Gross and Playfair arrived at the Hodgson home to conduct initial observations. They brought equipment such as cameras, recorders, and thermometers to document the events. On the first night, they heard the same knocking sound as the Hodgsons had described. They also witnessed objects moving by themselves. Gross and Playfair began to conduct more in-depth research, spending night after night in the Hodgson home to document the strange phenomena. They set up cameras in various corners of the house and a voice recorder in Janet and Margaret's bedroom. The strange occurrences continued, with increasing intensity. One of the most frightening incidents was when Janet was suddenly lifted from her bed and thrown across the room. Gross and Playfair managed to capture the moment on their camera. This incident not only increased the Hodgson family's fears, but also strengthened Gross and Playfair's belief that there was something extraordinary and unexplained in the house. News of the strange occurrences in the Hodgson home began to spread. Local and national media began to cover the case, drawing the attention of many people. Some believed it, but many were skeptical and dismissed it as a hoax or mass hysteria. Despite this, Gross and Playfair continued to try to uncover the truth behind this phenomenon. One of the most striking phenomena was the voice that came from Janet. The voice claimed to be Bill Wilkins, an elderly man who claimed to have lived in the house before he died. This voice had a different accent and intonation than Janet's voice, making Gross and Playfair convinced that this was not just child's play. In addition to the voice, there was a lot of other evidence that supported the existence of a poltergeist in the Hodgson house. Large objects such as tables and cabinets moved by themselves, often in front of many witnesses. Thermometers showed drastic changes in temperature in several rooms. In addition, mysterious claw marks and scratches appeared on the walls and furniture of the house. Neighbors and friends of the Hodgson family also gave testimony about the strange phenomena they had witnessed themselves. Several police officers who came to the house also gave official reports of the events they had experienced. All of this added credibility to Gross and Playfair's report and further strengthened the argument that the house was truly haunted. However, not everyone believed the incident. Many skeptics considered it a hoax perpetrated by Janet and Margaret. Seek attention. The media also began to cast a critical eye on the case. Gross and Playfair had to work hard to maintain their credibility and combat the growing skepticism. In an attempt to stop the terror experienced by the Hodgson family, Gross and Playfair tried various methods, including exorcisms and religious rituals. However, each attempt seemed to only make matters worse, with the poltergeist activity becoming more intense and frightening. Janet and her family experienced a series of frightening incidents that increasingly disrupted their lives. Janet often woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something was watching her. She was also often thrown out of bed or trapped on top of the closet without any reasonable explanation. The fear and trauma began to affect the Hodgson family's mental and emotional state. Janet and Margaret became more withdrawn and had difficulty sleeping. Johnny and Billy also felt frightened every night, always alert to strange noises and movements in the house. Peggy felt helpless and confused about what to do to protect her children. Gross and Playfair continued to document each incident meticulously. They collected evidence in the form of audio recordings, photographs, and videos showing poltergeist activity in the Hodgson home. Although skeptics remained skeptical of the story, the evidence Gross and Playfair collected provided a strong basis for the claim that there was something unexplained going on in the house. In addition to Gross and Playfair, Several other paranormal experts were involved in the investigation. They tried various methods to exorcise the poltergeist, ranging from religious prayers to exorcism techniques. However, none of these methods were successful in permanently stopping the poltergeist activity. The Enfield Poltergeist case became a hot topic in the media, with many different viewpoints. Many were skeptical and considered the incident a hoax perpetrated by Janet and Margaret. They accused the two children of seeking attention or perhaps experiencing mass hysteria. Local and national media coverage of the case varied from supportive to highly critical. Gross and Playfair continued to defend the authenticity of the case with the evidence they collected. They held press conferences and interviews to explain the phenomena they had witnessed. They also published scientific reports detailing every occurrence that occurred at the Hodgson home. However, skepticism remained, and they had to work hard to maintain their credibility. In addition to physical evidence, eyewitness accounts also supported Gross and Playfair's claims. Neighbors, friends of the Hodgson family, and even police officers who had visited the home testified to strange phenomena they had witnessed. This testimony added weight to the claim that there was something unexplained going on at the Hodgson home. Many of these eyewitnesses had good reputations in their communities, making their accounts even harder to dismiss. On a night full of terror, Janet felt unable to face the terrifying events that continued to haunt her. In desperation, she tried to escape from the house. However, every time she tried to get out, she felt an invisible force holding her back. She felt the air was heavy and cold, and voices calling her name in a threatening tone. Seeing Janet's condition getting worse, Gross and Playfair decided to perform an exorcism with the help of a priest who was experienced in handling cases like this. The exorcism was carried out with special prayers and rituals, but instead of calming down, the poltergeist activity became more intense. Janet had seizures and spoke in a voice that was not her own. After hearing a voice claiming to be Bill Wilkins, Gross and Playfair began to investigate the history of the house and the surrounding area. They discovered that a man, Bill Wilkins, had indeed lived in the house and died of a brain hemorrhage in a living room chair. This discovery provided additional evidence that the voices heard by Janet might be related to the house's past. Gross and Playfair also began to analyze the audio recordings they had collected. They found that the voices were of a frequency that could not possibly be produced by a child. Bill Wilkins' voice, for example, had a very different vocal characteristic than Janet's. This study further strengthened their belief that another entity was communicating through Janet. In addition to the voice recordings, Gross and Playfair collected physical evidence such as photographs and videos showing objects moving on their own. They also recorded drastic temperature changes in parts of the house that could not be explained by natural phenomena. All of this evidence was carefully collected and analyzed to ensure authenticity and reduce the possibility of fraud. One night, the terror in the Hodgson house reached its peak. Objects flew around the room, the knocking became louder and more intense, and Janet experienced levitation in front of her family. The family gathered in the living room, terrified and at a loss for what to do. Peggy tried to calm her children, while Gross and Playfair tried to document each incident. As the night progressed, they saw a shadow moving in the corner of the room. The shadow was human-shaped, but not clear. The entity began to approach Janet, who was in a semi-conscious state at the time. Janet suddenly speaks in Bill Wilkins' voice, expressing her anger and pain. The situation becomes even more tense when the entity suddenly disappears, leaving an eerie silence. The Hodgson family is so frightened that they decide to leave the house. They run outside with the clothes they have, seeking shelter in a neighbor's house. Gross and Playfair stay behind to document the remaining poltergeist activity. Despite the stressful situation, they are determined to find answers and find a way to help the family. Upon hearing news of the strange happenings in the Hodgson house, several renowned parapsychologists from around the world come to help. They bring sophisticated equipment and more scientific methods to analyze the phenomena. Their research reveals more evidence of an unseen force affecting the house. The community, initially skeptical, begins to show their support. Many take pity on the Hodgson family and help them by providing temporary housing and emotional support. The local pastor also holds a prayer meeting for the family's safety. The media's attitude also begins to change. Several major media outlets began to acknowledge the possibility of supernatural phenomena after seeing the evidence gathered by Gross, Playfair, and other experts. More balanced coverage began to emerge, giving a more even perspective to the case. After months of terror, poltergeist activity began to decline. Although there were still occasional strange occurrences, they were not as intense as before. The Hodgson family, while still terrified, began to return to their daily lives with greater peace. Gross and Playfair continued their research, trying to better understand the phenomenon. They wrote books and scientific papers summarizing their experiences and the evidence they had gathered. Although many skeptics remained skeptical, their work laid an important foundation for the study of poltergeist phenomena. Despite the decline in activity, no definitive solution or explanation was found. The Hodgsons remained in the house, albeit with a sense of trepidation. They accepted that some mysteries may never be fully solved. The Enfield Poltergeist case has become one of the most famous paranormal cases in the world. It has been the subject of numerous books, films, and documentaries, and has inspired many paranormal investigators. The Hodgsons, though still traumatized, found strength in the togetherness and support of their community. The story teaches us a lot about fear, belief, and the unseen forces that may be all around us. While not everyone believes in the phenomenon, the Enfield Poltergeist case remains a reminder that our world is full of mysteries that we do not fully understand. In retrospect, Gross and Playfair and the Hodgsons realized that while they did not have all the answers, they did their best to confront the unseen terror. The strength and resilience they showed is an inspiration to many who face fear and uncertainty in their lives. The story concludes with a reflection on the uncertainty of our world and how we can find strength in the face of things we cannot fully understand. The legacy of the Enfield Poltergeist case lives on, inspiring and terrifying generations. Thank you for listening to the chilling tale of the Enfield Poltergeist, a true story that reminds us that sometimes darkness and terror can creep into our lives without warning. What happened to the Hodgson family shows that some mysteries may never be fully solved. If you dare, stay tuned for more horror stories and supernatural phenomena. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next spooky tale. See you on the next spooky night. And remember, never underestimate the sounds in the night. They may be more than just imagination. Good night, and may the nightmares not come your way.